and welcome to Encounters with Polish and Ukrainian Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. When Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, we decided to open our platform to Ukrainian topics, both in Ukrainian literature itself, such as today's episode on the great poet and playwright Lesia Ukrainka, Ukrainian writers with a particular investment in Polish literature, and writing in Polish literature about Ukraine, such as our last episode about the Ukrainian school in Polish Romanticism. Since 19th century Ukrainian literature is a little outside my bailiwick, we'll keep the introduction brief today to give more time to our guest. But before we meet him, I'd like to thank everyone who has been following and supporting Encounters with Polish Literature. Remind you to click the thumbs up, ring the bell, subscribe, and leave a comment to help the program reach more viewers by moving up in the search rankings. Marko Pavlyshyn is Emeritus Professor of Ukrainian Studies at Monash University in Australia. He is the author of Olya Kobylanska Interpretations, published in Kharkiv in 2008, Canon and Iconostasis, published in Kyiv in 1997, literary translations from Ukrainian into English, and more than 100 chapters and articles, mainly on modern and contemporary Ukrainian literature. He has edited and co-edited 12 scholarly collections, including with Giovanni Broghi and Serhii Plokhy, Ukraine and Europe, Cultural Encounters and Negotiations, published in Toronto in 2017. He is a fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities and an international member of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. Marko, welcome to the program. It's great to finally have you here.
Very good to be here, David.
Give us a map of Ukrainian women writers and tell us where Lesia Ukrainka fits on it. I know she's considered to be one of the great Ukrainian writers, together with Shevchenko and Ivan Franko. So where is Lesia Ukrainka in the big history of Ukrainian literature?
Well, Lesia Ukrainka is the daughter of Olena Pchilka, kind of a major feminist and an organizer of literature by women. So she steps into a family which is highly literary and where women already play an important literary and intellectual role. Lesia Ukrainka, as a modern writer, as a woman writer who quite consciously puts herself into contrast with the kind of the existing traditional mode of Ukrainian literature of the 19th century, that traditional mode being very people-focused, which effectively means peasant focused, a literature that is concerned with the ideals of liberty and equality within the Ukrainian nation. Lesia Ukrainka, of course, steps outside of that, and she steps outside of that paradigm by demanding those same ideals: liberty, equality, solidarity, within a much broader European context. And of course, she is not alone in taking this highly progressive stance. Her close friend, Olya Kobylanska, is also regarded as a major figure of Ukrainian modernism, as a person who steps outside the conventional framework of Ukrainian literature and interacts intellectually with Western movements like Darwinism and Nietzscheism. And in fact, this transformative role of women that is enacted most clearly by Lesia Ukrainka and Olya Kobylanska at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, it continues. I mean, many of the most controversial works of recent times have been penned by women writers. So Oksana Zabuzhko, for example, is a notable example of a woman writer stepping outside of conventional frames. And some of the most interesting prose writing of recent times the work of Sofia Andruchovich, for example, or Oksana Zabuzhko. All of these women in one way or another assert their individuality, their novelty relative to what has gone before them. And they do it in different ways, of course, but these different ways always involve their assertion or revelation of their identity as women.
We hope to have Oksana Zabuzhko on in a couple of months, and maybe Sofia Andruchovich next year sometime. So we'll be able to thoroughly explore these their writing, or at least as much as we can in one episode of the show. I'm sure, like, for our audience, American, students and readers and people interested in Polish literature, there's probably some of them wonder, how did she get her name? How did she take her name, Lesia Ukrainka, from, I know her native, she was born Larisa Kosach. So
one of the formative, perhaps the most formative influence on Lesia Ukrainka as an intellectual, as distinct from a writer, a poet, a dramatist, right, was her uncle Drahomanov, Mikhail Drahomanov, an anthropologist, social thinker, a political activist, a political theorist, socialist. And Drahomanov, among his pseudonyms, used Ukrainec, the Ukrainian. He meant this in a very specific way. He defined Ukrainianness in a way that emphasized that Ukraine is the sum of all of the people living in the territories where Ukrainian is spoken, and people have Ukrainian ethnographic characteristics across two empires, across Austria-Hungary and the Russian Empire, where in the Russian Empire about 80% of Ukrainians lived, and the remainder in the crown provinces of Galicia and Bukovina in Austria-Hungary. Indeed, in one of the key essays by Drahomanov, the introductory essay to his journal Hromada, which means the community or the socium, he proposed the word Hromadivstvo as a Ukrainian equivalent of socialism. He goes into great lengths to define the Ukrainians as the people who speak Ukrainian, who are Ukrainian peasants, and Ukraine as the territory on which these people form the majority. So Lesia Ukrainka is following on her important uncle's definition of Ukrainianness. I mean, Ukrainian identity is among the important identities for her. And right. She chooses to write in Ukrainian. That is a difficult choice to make in the Russian Empire. Of course, it's prepared by her special family circumstances, but it's still a difficult choice for a person from a relatively privileged background in an imperial situation, not to make the metropolitan language and the metropolitan culture preeminent in one's own life as a person and as a literateur and as an intellectual. So that is what Ukrainka symbolizes. And that was a conscious choice of Lesia Ukrainka's, which she reflects upon, or at least embodies, in a substantial part of her lyrical poetry, particularly the early lyrical poetry, where she is still defining herself in various ways. One of those is a Ukrainian national within a Ukrainian literary tradition. Another is, of course, as a woman, an intellectual. Yet a further way is that she is a woman who is afflicted with tuberculosis and is struggling with this illness.
For which she travels for many cures, right?
She does indeed. She does indeed. Her entire life from her teens is in fact dominated by the need to seek help with her illness. There are trips to overseas specialists and surgeons for surgery. There are climate cures which she undertakes in Italy and in Egypt and elsewhere. So that's an important part of her life, and her early lyrics, in part, are also dedicated to finding a way to be while struggling with these limitations imposed by her own body. And she has a way of turning this personal situation into an analogy with the situation of Ukraine within the Russian Empire. It's the subject of some interesting poems.
Could we look at this poem that you've translated, Khamsin, which is the hot, dry wind in Egypt?
Before we proceed to that, to illustrate that notion of struggle and overcoming adversity, with a quote from an earlier and rather simpler poem, which is Contra, spero, I hope against hope. I struggle with hopelessness, I suppose. And it's a poem in which I'm going to read in Vera Rich's translation, or just a stanza or two, which gives a very clear idea of that sense of struggle, which is so important in the early self-definitional lyrics of Lesia Ukrainka. No, I want to smile through tears and weeping, sing my songs where evil holds its sway. Hopeless, a steadfast hope forever keeping, I want to live you thoughts of grief away. Yes, I'll smile indeed through tears and weeping, sing my songs where evil holds its sway. Hopeless, a steadfast hope forever keeping, I shall live your thoughts of grief away. So she echoes that stanza as the last stanza, the second stanza and the last stanza of the poem, to make that point emphatically. But you invited me to read Khamsin.
I'd like to come back to Contra, spero. Maybe we'll look at Cassandra. Then there seem to be some interesting overlapping of themes there. So let's keep that in our heads, and then we'll come back to it.
As you point out, I mean, Khamsin, the desert wind that comes from the south and sometimes even crosses the Mediterranean Sea and affects countries of southern Europe. Lesia Ukrainka writes this poem in 1910 when she is in Egypt on one of her cures, and the poem responds to an actual experience. We know this because she wrote about it to her mother, an actual experience of such a windstorm. Khamsin, red-haired, spins wild in desert dance, racing through air, thirst scorched, his dry wings scuffing sand, his breath a thick and stinging flame. O savage wedding feast, uprisen now from heavy stillness, sand sings, a reed pipe, and pebbles leaping drum accompaniment. Who in that yellow blinding mist dances in Khamsin's honor, diaphanously veiled and swiftly whirling? Mysterious wind-formed maidens, the melancholy desert's cheerful progeny? O foreign woman, do not look. I'll stop your eyes with sand. And jealously Khamsin enfolded all his dancers within his yellow robe. None dare behold them. The Arab in the desert prostrates himself as though in prayer. Just so. Pray, pray. I am an ancient god. I am that mighty Seth who tore apart Osiris's imperishable flesh and threw it to the desert. And oh, how Isis then did weep. The memory amused Khamsin, and all the desert seemed to rise aloft and surge into the heavens. In the yellow sky, the sun, Osiris' eye went dim. It was as though the whole world was made blind.
So here she is in this foreign setting, an outsider, reflecting on her position as the foreigner at that point. It's a wonderful translation. Thank you.
It's a wonderful poem. It's a wonderful poem. It's also a poem where Lesia Ukrainka takes a step back from the kind of the self-confidence that she generally radiates. In general, she likes to position herself as a powerful intellectual force, a woman capable of observing a situation, analyzing the situation, coming to conclusions about the situation. And a lot of her writing about Egypt is like this. She puts on her anthropologists and sociologists' glasses. She puts on, she opens her history books, and she looks at the people of Egypt, whom she thinks of as being terribly oppressed by their own rulers, but also, of course, by the British colonialists. And she's confronted with the question of how can these people look so happy? And she has a theory to explain this. Partly it's the climate. It's the fact that the Nile has been gifting these people its wonderful waters, which enables the Nile Valley to be such a fertile place, and life for the ordinary person not to be so bad. Mm-hmm. This is the theory, and she says this quite openly and with the air of somebody approaching this situation and knowing it with the tools of Western social science, and judging it from the position of somebody steeped in the Enlightenment tradition and proclaiming the values of freedom, equality, fraternity, and being very secular about it as well. That's the Lesia Ukrainka background, as it were. And then comes this poem which shakes that certainty. And she is a poet great enough to formulate that moment of epistemological doubt, which overcomes her as she witnesses this storm. The poem begins with observations, very very sensual observations, and then the observations take her into a kind of a mythological realm. She's forced to think about the totally independent and impervious to Western knowledge forms of culture of Egypt, and she senses that threat, that danger to her worldview, which is of course Osiris and the eye, the seeing eye, which is the image of enlightenment.
Right.
And she sees that whole thing disappear. The world turns upside down. The sand rises into the heavens, the light disappears. All she sees is a yellow fog. And that last line, it was as though the whole world was made blind. It captures that sudden sense of insecurity. Well, this is, of course, a kind of a moment of realization that she is actually captured as well within that colonialism of which she is such an opponent, because she opposes the colonialism that Ukraine suffers within the Russian Empire. But then she comes to Egypt and has become, as it were, a representative of the West in a colonial space.
Right.
And her sense of, well, it's not superiority, because she's constantly expressing her empathy with the oppressed Egyptian people. But she always does so from a position of superior knowledge and insight. Mm-hmm. And this is the poem where she allows herself to doubt that. It's a magnificent poem, I think.
It's something that I think I also found in Cassandra, that she's often opposing, an idea of rationality to some irrational force, to psychology, to guilt and things like that. I mean, that are opposed to sort of Cassandra as the prophetess, or her knowledge of the future, that there's a burden to that knowledge, and then that's the irrational thing. I mean, maybe that's that's what makes it modern and not an ancient play. But maybe we can move right there, and then we can move back and forth between these three texts. Eh?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're perfectly right. I mean, Cassandra is also a work in which the issue of truth is central, so central, and yet it comes into question. I mean, the very possibility of truth. I mean, Cassandra knows, she sees what must happen. That's her destiny. That's the punishment she's been given by Apollo, and the accompanying punishment is, of course, that nobody believes her.
Right.
And when her prophecies come true, she is held responsible for bringing about the bad events that she has seen coming. And while she sees what is coming, she cannot change it. And so she prefers to remain silent. And when she's goaded into speaking, she says things that people don't want to hear. And well, the tradition of literary criticism has generally viewed Cassandra very favorably as the keeper of the truth, so the person who is principled, who will not deviate from what she knows to be the case. And the figure of Helenus, her brother, kind of the smooth operator, the person who knows how to monetize the pretense at soothsaying. He's the opposite. He can't see the future, but he can see what it is in his interest to pretend to know. Yeah. And of course, he does so to great effect, always protecting himself, ensuring himself a sort of a comfortable and respected place in whatever society he finds himself in under whichever power arrangements prevail.
Right.
The two are caught in an opposition, which Lesia Ukrainka explores in a very powerful scene, quite a long scene, where Cassandra is explaining not only her incapability of speaking other than the truth that she sees, but also the the ethical rectitude of doing so. Whereas Hellenis, who's the opportunist par excellence, disputes the value of doing so, points out, the advantages of his perspective, not only for himself, but for the society which he claims to serve, and not giving people nightmares in advance of the destruction of Troy, but rather giving them hope and giving them encouragement. And of course, traditional criticism has said, well, Hellenis is a representative of well, he's a liar, basically. He represents the misuse of authority. He's not. He is the negative, which we are supposed to decry. We're supposed to be in solidarity with Lesia Ukrainka as she stands with Cassandra and casts Helen as a dark and destructive figure.
On one level, I'm reading the debate between Cassandra and Hellenis, sort of in a political way, perhaps, that Hellenis, wants to make he's the demagogue. He has all these smoke and mirrors and things like that. And he wants to make kind of an argument for free will against this belief that, well, the prophecy is what the prophecy is, and we can't change fate. But on the other hand, I think that space between them is sort of where, maybe Lesia Ukrainka is kind of deconstructing a philosophical argument, an argument that's about semantics, really. I mean, it follows very much the lines of the argument about Aristotle's famous sea battle in De Interpretatione, chapter 9, right, about whether statements about things in the future are at present true or false, when we can't know about whether they're really true or false. And then Hellenis, gives some, very standard kind of technical objections to that, right? He says, well, what if my servant, lies to me and says, oh, he's looking for his kylix, right? His cup. And he says, and he asks the servant where he is, and the servant doesn't want to look for it. So he says, oh, I don't know where, I think it must be lost. And he's lying. He just doesn't want to look for it. But then it turns out, or he says it must have been stolen, right? And then it turns out that but he doesn't know that it's been stolen. And it turns out that between the statement and, some later point, it actually is stolen. So does that mean that the lie was actually the truth because, he stated it, it turned out to be true, even though it was not his intent to render the truth. And those are all kind of standard arguments against the sea battle problem. And then she brings up this question, these other questions, right, about intention, about the burden of knowing the future. I thought, that there's this very dramatic scene where her fiance or former fiance, Cassandra's love, Dolan, she knows that he's going into battle and that he's not going to come back, and she's agonizing over it, but she can't do anything about it, and she knows this. That's somehow in contradistinction to the fact that this is the truth, and the truth is what it is, but the truth is hard. And there are other consequences to it.
Absolutely. And some more recent readings of Cassandra, one in particular by Vera Aheyeva, actually takes issue with the critical tradition. And well, look, even philosophically, Hellenis may well have a point. here's Cassandra saying, the truth is the truth. And here's Helenus saying in a very contemporary for us way, well, look, truth just is an effect of discourse. You know, we generate the impression of truth, and if people are willing to accept what we say to be true, then who's to say that is not the truth, which is a very disconcerting thing to say, and very disconcerting to present readers who have experience of the kind of manipulations that a contemporary electronic media enable. The whole scene is wonderful, but perhaps it's worth reading just a fragment which illustrates it particularly well. Cassandra accuses Helenus. She says, but tell me, how are you able then to tell the public God revealed? I have seen this, or heard this mystical voice, when it is all untrue? And Helenus responds, again, this truth and untruth, let's drop these words, as they both mean nothing. Perhaps you think that truth begets the speech? I think it's speaking that begets the truth. And what are we to call such truth that is born of lies? Or will you tell me that you have never countenanced such birth? I have, more times than I can count. Word is fertile and bears more fruit than Mother Earth herself. Yeah, word is fertile, and it is fertile. It is fertile of belief, and who's to say that belief is not truth? And this is a question that confronts Lesia Ukrainka also as a person who confronts religion. Who's to say that religious belief is not belief in a truth?
Yeah, I was thinking also about the feminist aspects of the work. I mean, some places it's fairly straightforward, but keeping religion in our minds. For instance, there's straightforward statements about women's role in society when her brother says, Dave Phobos says, "Oh, it's better for you to spin than to tell prophecies, because that's the role for a maiden." Even though she comes across as a much more authoritative person than perhaps Dave Phobos does in the play, and then she reflects on the cost of the sacrifice of Iphigenia. Who the story being that Agamemnon kills one of Artemis's sacred stags, and Artemis demands a sacrifice in return for this, and the daughter of Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, is named as that sacrifice. And there's an interesting moment, I thought, when it returns in the epilogue. When it first appears, a little earlier than the passage we were just looking at, where she says to Dave Phobos, "Brother, you do not know the cost of women's sacrifice. So let me tell you, Iphigenia's was not the greatest or the hardest tribute. Oh, they are legion, the nameless women who had made such much harder sacrifices, much harder and unsung of sacrifices. If you had come to ask me to give up my life, my only life, I think perhaps I would have done it, brother, and let them spill my blood. But this, oh no, I'm sorry, I cannot do. I am no hero." This is in reference to marrying Enomaus, this other character who's not part of the traditional Greek myth. But it comes back. It's in the epilogue, and she's confronting Agamemnon directly. And she says, "Why did you forget about it when you made sacrifice of your own daughter? You forgot who was Iphigenia's mother, who was her father. All you knew was that a furious goddess needed sacrifice before you could destroy our cherished Troy." And that, to me, sounds a lot like feminist readings I've heard of the sacrifice of Isaac. How did you forget that you were the father? that there, I don't know for sure, but there could be a layering of religious ideas around sacrifice there.
Certainly, the notion of women as bearing the sacrifice of the kind of society that the West has developed and lives in Lesia Ukrainka's time is powerfully present in her work, and that kind of rebellion against the diminution of women, their reduction to menial roles within the palace in Troy, for example, and the roles that all of the women of equal status with Cassandra play, which are subservient and which never rise to the level of even consciousness of their subservience. And Cassandra contrasting with them as a woman who sees that she should have the capacity to act on the same plane as the men. I mean, the public sphere, the military sphere, the political sphere in this place all belongs to men, and men treat women as tools. And Cassandra herself is to be married off in order to secure a particular political arrangement. And the sacrifice of Iphigenia is, a sacrifice which in Lesia Ukrainka's text is viewed by Agamemnon as being worthwhile because it will make possible the continuation of the war against Troy. And of course, figures like this, women who have the perspicuity, the understanding to analyze their own subaltern situation. These are frequent characters in Lesia Ukrainka, right? So the young woman who in the noblewoman goes to Russia as the bride of an aristocrat and encounters a level of unfreedom there that she finds intolerable. Or Lesia Ukrainka's complete rewriting of the Don Juan myth, where Anna becomes the powerful figure, the carrier of action and will, which she inherits from her father, the commander. It is a force which turns the power relationship around. Don Juan becomes an effete and powerless, and in fact insignificant figure, driven by quite petty and pettily defined bodily desires. So Lesia Ukrainka is constantly negotiating this issue of women who should have equal rights to agency in the world, but have been prevented by historical circumstance from this extremely important aspect of human equality.
I thought it was very powerful, the moment where she responds directly to Eunomaus, that he's made this offer to fight on the side of the Trojans, if he can have Cassandra as his bride, and she makes it very certain that, and he says, well, I could have fought on the other side and stolen you, right? I mean that's so the option, and she says, but now you're fighting on our side, so you're going to buy me, that she's a slave either way, right? I mean that either stolen or purchased, and then she makes this, again, a very, sort of sharp philosophical distinction between, he says, well, this is, what heroes do, right? I mean, we attack, and then we defeat the enemy, and then we steal the women. that's just how it goes. And Cassandra says, well, but you should be acting, out of a disinterested sense of duty. A Kantian moral imperative, that rather than to steal the bride, and of course she knows that he's not going to defeat the Greeks, so she can happily. That's also another strange moment, right? She can agree, saying, okay, I'll go along with it, but she knows that it's not going to happen. One thing that I wasn't settled on, in reading this was, how do we read Cassandra's enigmatic laugh at the end? That I thought was a very peculiar moment, as if I wasn't sure where it was coming from or how we got there exactly.
There has been the worst possible tragedy for the Trojans, the Trojan court. Personally, for Troy as a city, the enemy has prevailed. Everybody's worst nightmares have come true. Cassandra's prophecy has come true. Everybody is about to be enslaved, and she laughs. Well, this is the despairing laugh of a woman who realizes that no matter what human beings do, they are at the behest of destiny or the gods, and the only response to that from a human perspective is to laugh at the pettiness of human endeavors, to laugh bitterly, to laugh sarcastically at the failure of one's best intentions, and to laugh at the human tragedy that follows such a thing as a military defeat. It could also be her laughter at all of those who questioned her prescience, all of those who have disregarded her and have belittled her hitherto. So now she is in the position of being able, in her laughter, to involve them as the victims of her scorn. It's certainly not a laughter of amusement. It's one of those instances where an expression, a physiological expression of an emotion, in fact, signifies its opposite.
What can we say about, we see all these new editions of Lesia Ukrainka coming out from the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, and a lot of, I know Tamara Hundurova has just written published a book about Lesia Ukrainka that is it a kind of long development, that there is this current fascination with Ukrainka? Is it being accelerated by the dramatic events in Ukraine? How do you understand it?
Well, both of those things are true. But even more fundamentally, the reason why certain texts are recognized in their own time as having cultural weight, and then demonstrate that by sustaining reinterpretations and rereadings from generation to generation. That I think is one of the reasons why why Lesia Ukrainka continues to be important. She always has been important. Her writing is so rich and contains so many ideas that in her own time were important and formed the grounds for discussion and have remained important and continue to be worthy of discussion. I mean, these issues that we've talked about today, I mean, the nature of truth, what is the oppression of a human being? What are the phenomena that signify the particular oppression of women in the kind of society that she inhabited and that we in large parts still inhabit? What does it mean to be, associated so deeply with a culture that is under pressure, a subordinated, a subaltern culture? All of these issues are alive to us today. Then there's the particular historical circumstance of Ukrainian literary history and literary criticism in Ukraine, having been, from the 1930s right through to the 1980s, been driven by, the official Soviet paradigm of understanding culture, and I mean not only the kind of the base and superstructure that the literary works illustrate, class struggle and so on, but the combination of that with the constant need to extol and admire, Russian culture and its preeminence and its tremendous influence and its superiority, basically, over all of the peripheral cultures of the Soviet Union. So having decades of such literary criticism has caused people to look at the classics anew and to try to do readings that cast aside that heritage of basically self-flagellating and self-humiliating literary scholarship. And this has given rise to some extremely good readings, particularly of the women writers who in their own time were already exceptional. Right. And that is the case with Lesia Ukrainka and Kobylyanska, as we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. Now, on the questions that are in Cassandra, of course, the issue of truth is so fundamentally important to us now, as we struggle to retain a notion of truth in a sea of disinformation and deliberate obfuscation and propaganda. That was the element of direct relevance, which has kind of arisen in a context which wasn't there 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And then there's the point that the translator, Nina Murray, makes in her introductory remarks. I mean, she was impressed by the analogy between the situation of Cassandra, the prophetess of the dangers confronting Troy and the imminence of Troy's fall, and the situation where there were many voices in the geopolitical public sphere for warning of the impending invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the full-scale war that ensued, and forces wishing to resist that bad news. So yes, there are very many ways in which Lesia Ukrainka is alive to us today. But there's also, and this is something that is extremely difficult to communicate in a translation, though Lesia Ukrainka is at an advantage here, I think. And that is that there is a force of language. And Lesia Ukrainka is a great master of blank verse. And she writes her dramas and her full-scale dramas and her dramatic monologues mainly in unrhymed iambic pentameter. And she has that magnificent balance between, on the one hand, the solemnity and poeticity of speech, and on the other hand, its naturalness, its realistic quality. Now that balance, I think, is one of the things that makes Lesia Ukrainka such a powerful, poetic dramatist. And at the same time, it makes it so extremely difficult to render her into another technical medium. Those literatures which are fortunate enough to have the 19th century and the 20th century novel as the mainstay of their literary tradition are at an advantage, because I think it is objectively easier to perform the fantastically difficult task of translation from prose than it is from poetry, or indeed from verse drama.
Well, thank you so much for giving us this little introduction to Lesia Ukrainka. Can you, since we have often students watching our program thinking about advanced study in our fields, can you say anything about what's the state of Ukrainian studies in Australia where you are?
At this moment, at the University of Melbourne, there is an agreement to create a research position in Ukrainian studies, which one hopes will develop and become permanent. This is a position in the discipline of history. The reason for that, I think, is an agreement on the part of the university with something that has been the conviction of the Ukrainian diaspora community in Australia for a long time, that the time has long ago come to address the imbalance between, the study of Ukraine and things Ukrainian, and the study of the Moscow-centric study of the large part of the Asian continent.
Certainly something that those of us in Polish studies in American Slavic departments have been feeling for a long time. So
one has to say that the gesture of, I hope it's more than a gesture, I hope that it's an intent to decolonize Slavic and East European studies, is an attempt to, I think, to look anew at the subject matter of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, and its neighbors, in a way that gives due attention to those parts of the world which, because they have been dominated by the Kremlin, have often been viewed by the West as simply marginally relevant extensions of kind of an essentially monolithic geopolitical and geocultural force focused on Moscow and Russia. And the fact that the Congress of the Association for Slavic, East European and Eurasian Studies that has just finished in Philadelphia had the thematic title Decoloniality or Decolonization, is, I hope, symptomatic in this regard.
Let's hope it continues. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Encounters with Polish and sometimes Ukrainian literature.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to converse with you, David, and I hope that you do indeed proceed with your plan to invite other Ukrainianists to your Encounters series to discuss such exciting Ukrainian writers as the ones we've mentioned today, including Sofia Andruchovich.
Thank you. Don't go away. Please subscribe and click the bell to stay on top of the program. Watch the credits for some recommendations about how you can support aid for Ukraine and for Ukrainians fleeing the war in their country. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. The Polish Cultural Institute New York sponsors our program. Bartek Remisko, head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute New York, is our executive producer. Natalia Iudin is my fellow producer and editor. Our opening and closing music is by Radek Przedpełski. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month. See you then.
Jest to szary dzień, jak zawsze w tej okolicy. Cała sceneria wydaje się chwilami fotografią z ilustrowanej gazety. Tak szare, tak płaskie są domy, ludzie i pojazdy.